Okay, so hello everybody. Today's how-to video will be on effective pricing techniques for your product or service. I'll start this video by highlighting some of the most important do's and don'ts for consumer pricing. I will then go on to touch on methods for testing your price before you actually put your product or service in the market. These methods are crucial for gauging customers' responses to your stated price. So to start off, let's discuss the relationship between customer perceived value and price. When a consumer sees a product or service, they perceive it as valuable according to their own preferences. Likely, they will estimate this value in monetary terms by placing a price they'd be willing to pay on that product or service. As the entrepreneur, it is your job to price your product as close to, if not lower than, the perceived value price for the customer. Now, this relationship may seem a little confusing, however, it's easier to think of it in terms of a scale. So in this situation, the red line is the value that the customer would be willing to pay for that product or service. In this example, it's $345. If the entrepreneur is effective in their market research, they would know that pricing at $345 would earn them the most profits because that is the highest amount of money that their target segment, a member from their target segment, will be willing to pay based on their perceived value. Pricing above the red line could be potentially bad for business, considering that the price exceeds the customer perceived value for that product. Pricing below the red line isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, it is important to note that pricing below the red line leaves money on the table. The customer is likely to perceive this relationship as is in this example with $320 as the stated price and $345 as the perceived price. That the customer perceives this as coming out as a winner in this situation. However, it is more likely feasible than not to make sure to cover all of your operating expenses before pricing below what the customer would perceive as fair in pricing your product or service. Like I said, in most situations, it is feasible to price at a point that covers both fixed and variable expenses, since if these two requisites are not required or not fulfilled, rather, then the entrepreneur will likely fail in the early stages of their venture development. So there are a few more rules to noting entrepreneurial pricing for a product or service. One, make sure to get the price right as early as possible, as it is difficult to change in the future. Raising a price after one has already been released to the public will spur a perceived unfairness in the eyes of the consumer. Even if this price increase is perfectly reasonable, as it is attributed to something like a expense increase or different market values, doesn't matter because customers will always see a price increase as being cheated in this situation. Additionally, the entrepreneur should always use odd numbers rather than even totals when pricing your product or service. This again pertains to the concept of customer perceived value. When customers see a price that is odd, like $42.95 for example, as opposed to $43 even, the customer will attribute the difference as being more related to costs of the product, thus perceiving the product to be more fair for the consumer. So now that we have covered the essentials to entrepreneurial pricing, it would be worth noting some of the various methods for pre-market price testing. One way to do this would be through a concept test. In this type of testing, a group of consumers are shown a pamphlet or a flyer that lists features and benefits of your novel product or service. After being shown the concept, the customer would choose which price they would be willing to pay out of a list of stated prices. Whichever price gets the most responses should be the price that the entrepreneur sticks with when pricing their product or service. It is important to note that this type of concept testing can be extremely biased due to consumers always wanting to pay the lowest prices possible. A good way to combat this is to concept test a control group that has similar benefits and features to the product or service that you are originally trying to concept test. Another such type of testing for pre-market price gauging would be through a dry test. And this type of test actually requires that the entrepreneur puts a concept of the product or service online into an e-commerce platform so that it is actually available for sale. So depending on the price that you state on this e-commerce site, customers will either click on your product or service to buy it, or they could skip over it because they view the price as either too costly or too low, thus yielding a crummy product. If the customer selects to purchase, then they will be told that the product or service is still in development, and then they will likely be given some sort of discount or premium once the product or service has been released. Although this last step is not necessarily required, it is often necessary in most situations, considering that the customer could feel cheated out of wanting to select a product but only being told that the product is still in development. So the number of clicks that the entrepreneur gets on the purchase button can be used to gauge how likely consumers would be to purchase your product or service at that price. Entrepreneurs can test a whole different range of prices in a dry test and gauge which one gets the most hits. So to recap today, we covered the essential do's and don'ts for entrepreneurial pricing. We then went on to highlight a few price testing techniques that the entrepreneur can use before officially launching their product or service. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like or a comment and subscribe. Make sure to follow us on our Instagram page at UMB_entrepreneurs and on our Facebook page at step-UMass Boston. Thank you all and have a great day.